Imagine trying to like explain the concept of this burning life or death urgency to a machine that just, well, it doesn't have a heartbeat.
Right. It's a machine.
Exactly. So you present this scenario where literally every second counts. The stakes are absolute. And the analytical system on the other end, processes your words, it scans its parameters, and then
Yeah.
responds with this calm, synthetic voice.
Saying something totally disconnected.
Yeah. It says, I sense that you are feeling frustrated.
Wow.
I mean, the machine completely misdiagnoses absolute conviction as just like a mere emotional glitch.
Right.
It's this fascinating, almost surreal interaction. But what's really captivating about it is how perfectly that mirrors the way human beings treat each other, like when we're confronted with uncomfortable truths.
It is a really remarkable starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And the material we are diving into today actually centers heavily around that exact dynamic.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at a deeply personal, intensely theological dialogue. It's between an author, a modern believer, who basically identifies his role as a watcher of the signs.
Right, a watcher.
Yeah. And he's having this exchange with an analytical AI system. Through this dialogue, the author is essentially mapping out this huge philosophical and spiritual transition.
Tracing a line, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's tracing a line from a state of passive, comfortable belief into what he views as a state of absolute red-hot spiritual readiness.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the overarching theme of this material, and I think this is so crucial for you listening today, is how incredibly resistant modern culture is to that exact transition.
Oh, totally. Both secular and religious culture.
Right. The author presents this framework of active discipleship, but he spends, a massive amount of time just analyzing the defense mechanisms people use to avoid it.
Yeah, to dodge the accountability.
Exactly. And whether you share the author's theological worldview or not, the psychological breakdown of how people weaponize emotion to shut down difficult conversations it's just incredibly compelling.
It really is. I mean, the author is essentially constructing a defensive narrative arc. He's not just saying, here is what a believer should do.
Right.
He's meticulously diagnosing why they failed to do it.
Diagnosing the failure point.
Yeah. He argues that modern believers are just navigating this landscape filled with theological loopholes, emotional manipulation, and just profound spiritual isolation.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that exact roadmap.
Right.
We need to look at how the text defines a true disciple, how it instructs you to navigate environments that are just compromised by noise and distraction.
Yes, and finally, the underlying engine driving this whole worldview, which is this overwhelming sense of a ticking clock urgency.
So let's start with the baseline, because to understand this red-hot readiness the author advocates for, we really have to define what he's critiquing, right?
Right, the alternative.
Yeah. He identifies this widespread phenomenon that we could call the lukewarm loophole.
Lukewarm loophole. I like that.
Yeah, the premise here is that modern believers have developed a highly sophisticated method for compartmentalizing the really demanding aspects of their faith.
They absolutely have. The author points out this specific rationalization people use when they read the incredibly demanding commands of Jesus in the New Testament.
The really heavy stuff.
Exactly. When the text demands that a follower, take up their cross or forsake all that they have, the modern, comfortable reader often puts up what you could call a historical buffer.
A historical buffer. Wait, explain how that works.
Well, they argue that these intense sacrificial demands were directed exclusively at the original 12 disciples.
Oh, I see.
The logic goes something like, Jesus was speaking to a specific group of men in a specific socio-political context way back in the 1st century.
So it doesn't apply to me.
Exactly. They say that level of radical sacrifice doesn't apply to a modern person just living a normal, everyday life.
I mean, it's brilliant from a psychological preservation standpoint,
Very convenient.
It operates a lot like someone wanting the prestige of a certain citizenship without, wanting to pay the taxes or serve in the military.
Yes. That's a great way to put it.
They want the cultural and emotional comforts of the belief system, the community, the sense of peace, the promise of an afterlife.
But they wanted to completely discard the structural obligations.
Right. But the text we're looking at today aggressively dismantles this historical buffer. And it does it by digging into the actual language of the New Testament.
It goes straight to the Greek.
Yeah.
The word translated as disciple in the New Testament is mathetes.
Mathetes.
Right. And the author emphasizes that mathetes is not a title reserved for some elite inner circle of 12 guys.
Like it's not a VIP club?
No. not at all. In antiquity, the term literally translates to a learner or a follower. It was just a universal term.
So anyone could be a mathetes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It described an apprentice who attached themselves to a teacher and fully adopted their philosophy and way of life. So the text argues that the structural demands of Jesus were tied to this universal concept of the mathetes, not just one specific historical moment.
And the sources back this up by looking at the raw, unedited context of these commands. Like Mark 8.34 and Luke 9.23 are super central to the author's argument here.
Oh, absolutely pivotal.
In Mark, the text explicitly notes that Jesus called the people unto him with his disciples also.
Right, he called the crowd.
Yeah. He deliberately widened the audience. He didn't pull the 12 into like a private back room to give them the hard news. He stood in front of the crowd and used the phrase, "Whosoever will come after me."
That word, whosoever, that is the critical lever the author uses to just pry open the lukewarm loophole.
Pry it wide open.
Yeah, because the inclusion of the crowd, combined with whosoever, it totally removes the ability to claim you have some historical or situational exemption.
Right. You can't say, he wasn't talking to me.
Exactly. And the standards established for this universal discipleship are uncompromising. I mean, the author cites this whole cascade of structural requirements directly from the text.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so Luke 14.33 sets the baseline of forsaking all.
Forsaking all.
Right. John 8.31 requires continuing in the Word. John 13.35 mandates loving one another as this visible identifier. And John 15.8 demands the bearing of fruit.
I mean, just looking at those verbs, forsaking, continuing, loving, bearing, they are all continuous active states.
Yep.
None of them are passive. It kind of makes me think of the difference between downloading a language learning app and actually moving to a foreign country.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, because you can have the app on your phone for years. You can tell everyone at parties you are learning Spanish.
You're not fluent.
No. If you never open it, if you never subject yourself to the actual friction of trying to speak to a native speaker, you aren't bilingual, you just have an app. The author seems to be arguing that millions of people are walking around with the app on their phone, claiming fluency, but they've never actually spoken a word under pressure.
That captures the friction perfectly, because the author leans heavily on the scriptural warning against exactly this kind of passive intellectual assent.
Just agreeing in your head.
Yes. The text pulls from James chapter 2, specifically verses 14 through 20. And this passage systematically deconstructs the idea that intellectual belief is somehow enough.
Right. What does it say?
It literally asks, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he have faith and have not works?"
Wow.
And the conclusion the text presents is stark. Faith without works is dead. It is non-functional.
Non-functional faith. And the text also brings in Matthew 7, right? The
Yeah.
famous parable of the builders.
Yes, the house on the sand versus the house on the rock.
And the fascinating thing about that parable, which the author highlights, is that both men hear the exact same words.
They do.
They possess the exact same information. The only difference is the physical execution of that information. The text literally says, "Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father."
Right. He that doeth action. And it really raises an interesting point of comparison between the historical context of these texts and the modern environment that the author is navigating today.
How so?
Well, in the first century, the friction against active discipleship was largely external and physical.
Like you could literally be killed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Adopting the title of mathetes carried the literal threat of state-sanctioned violence. The cost was immediate. It was visible. But today, especially in the cultures this author is addressing, the friction is far more insidious.
Right, because society generally isn't threatening you with physical harm for holding a belief. Society is perfectly content with you having the app on your phone as long as you keep your phone on silent.
Precisely. Keep it on silent. The surrounding culture actually encourages the lukewarm state.
Because it's safe.
Yeah, because a passive believer is compliant. They don't disrupt the status quo. The challenge the author presents is that stepping out of that passive compliance, actually attempting to execute those verbs of forsaking, continuing, and bearing fruit, that immediately makes you an outlier.
You become a problem.
You become a totally disruptive force.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. Isn't it entirely natural for human beings to seek equilibrium?
Sure. biologically and socially.
Right. From a sociological perspective, a society functions because people agree not to constantly disrupt each other with absolute, unyielding demands.
True.
So how does the author reconcile this baseline human desire for just a peaceful, non-disruptive life with the demand for this radical, red-hot discipleship? Does he view the desire for peace as inherently flawed?
Not the desire itself, but he views the modern definition of peace as flawed.
Okay.
In the author's framework, the peace offered by a lukewarm culture is basically artificial. It's a ceasefire built on compromised truths. True peace, from this theological perspective, only comes from alignment with the absolute truth, even if achieving that alignment requires severe social disruption.
Wow.
Yeah, the text quotes 1 John 3.18 to drive this home. Let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. The author views the refusal to disrupt the artificial peace as an actual failure to love in deed and truth.
You know, it's so challenging to actually ask yourself, and you, listening right now, should think about this. Do your actions really align with your stated beliefs, or are you just loving in word and tongue?
It's a very uncomfortable mirror to look into.
Which brings us to a critical pivot point in the author's narrative. If we accept the premise that the text demands an active, disruptive discipleship, why do so many people just stall out the moment they try to apply it?
Right.
The author argues that the instant a person attempts to transition from passive agreement to active execution, they step onto a highly sophisticated emotional battlefield.
This is where the psychological analysis in the source material becomes incredibly sharp.
Yeah, it really does.
The author details how adversaries, and he notes these adversaries are often not secular critics, but rather lukewarm peers within the exact same religious ecosystem.
Which is wild. Friendly fire.
Exactly, friendly fire. They utilize emotional manipulation as a primary defense mechanism.
Why do they do that?
Their goal is to neutralize the disruptive truth, and they do this by weaponizing the believer's own passion against them.
This circles right back to the interaction we mentioned at the very beginning. The AI glitch anecdote.
The perfect microcosm.
It really is. The author is interacting with this analytical system, and he decides to run a calculated test. He purposefully pushes the boundaries of the system to see how it handles controversial or absolute statements.
Right. And he executes this test with complete cognitive control.
He knows exactly what he is doing.
He knows exactly what he is doing and why he is doing it.
And when the AI safety protocols engage and block his input, the system responds with that deeply human-sounding phrase, "I hear your frustration."
And the author's reaction to this is highly instructive.
Yeah, what does he do?
He immediately corrects the system. He states unequivocally that there is zero frustration in his voice or his intent. He was conducting a calm, mechanical test of the system's boundaries.
So the system looked at a user intentionally pressing against a boundary, ran that behavior through its sentiment analysis parameters, and just defaulted to the most common human emotion associated with boundary pushing.
Frustration.
Yeah. It misdiagnosed deep focus and intentionality as an emotional breakdown. And the author uses this as a direct mirror for human social dynamics.
It is a profound parallel. I mean, think about it. When an individual operating in this red-hot state speaks plainly, maybe they point out a difficult scriptural reality or challenge a comfortable compromise.
They disrupt the peace.
Right. And the most common response from the surrounding group isn't a theological counterargument. The response is a behavioral diagnosis. They say, "Why are you so angry?"
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that defense. Why is that specific label angry so effective? Like, if I'm sitting in a room and someone brings up a genuinely uncomfortable reality about my lifestyle or my beliefs, and my immediate response is, "Wow, you seem really angry. What have I just accomplished in that room?"
You have successfully changed the subject entirely.
Yeah.
You've taken the spotlight off the uncomfortable truth and placed it squarely on the other person's emotional state. It is a brilliant deflection tactic.
Because now we're talking about my tone instead of your actions.
Exactly. If the group accepts your premise that the speaker is merely angry or frustrated, then the speaker's words are immediately downgraded from truth to a rant.
Oh, wow.
You no longer have to engage with the substance of the message because you have completely invalidated the messenger. It allows the lukewarm individual to avoid the mirror entirely.
It provides total immunity. You don't have to change a thing.
Zero accountability.
And the author draws a fascinating distinction here to counter this tactic
Yeah.
because he contrasts passion with frustration. In his framework, passion is highly organized. It is driven by purpose, clarity, and a deep understanding of the mechanics of the truth being delivered. Frustration, on the other hand, is chaotic.
It's reactive.
Yeah, it stems from helplessness, confusion, or just a lack of control over a situation.
And the author deepens this analysis by introducing a theological concept that has profound psychological implications. It's the contrast between what he calls the old man and the new man.
The old man and the new man. Let's break that down.
Okay, so in this paradigm, the old man represents the unredeemed, ego-driven nature. When the old man encounters conflict, his response is rooted entirely in self-preservation.
Protecting the ego.
Right. He reacts with flesh and blood violence, rage, and defensive hostility
Yeah.
because his core identity feels threatened.
But the new man, the active disciple we've been talking about, operates on an entirely different grid. The new man is not trying to protect his ego at all. He is driven by this intense spiritual urgency. The author uses the imagery of a rescue mission. The urgency isn't born of some personal slight. It's the urgency of someone trying to pull people out of a burning building before the roof collapses.
And here lies the tragic miscommunication at the very heart of this emotional battlefield.
This is key.
To a person who doesn't believe the building is on fire,
Yeah.
who just wants to sit comfortably in the living room.
Watching TV.
Right. To them, the frantic, forceful actions of the rescuer seem completely unhinged. They mistake the intensity of a life-saving mission for a personal, hostile attack.
They just think you're crazy.
They simply cannot differentiate between someone who is furious with them and someone who is desperately trying to save them.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting for me. How does a believer objectively know the difference within themselves?
That's a great question.
Because history is just full of people who did horrific, toxic things while claiming they were just acting with righteous urgency, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
How does the author's framework ensure that this red-hot passion doesn't just devolve into self-righteous cruelty disguised as a rescue mission?
That is a critical vulnerability, and the text addresses it by heavily emphasizing the concept of discernment and the true nature of wisdom.
Okay, what's the diagnostic tool?
The author points to James 3, specifically verses 14 through 17. The passage explicitly warns against having bitter envying and strife in your hearts. It notes that this kind of operation brings confusion and every evil work.
It actually labels that as earthly and sensual wisdom.
Exactly. Earthly wisdom.
So if the outcome of the intensity is just chaos, bitterness, and ego-driven arguments, it's the old man operating, regardless of the religious vocabulary being used.
You nailed it. The text contrasts this with the wisdom that is from above, which is described as first pure, then peaceable, gentle, full of mercy and good fruits.
It's a totally different flavor.
It really is. And the author pairs this with 2 Timothy 1.7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.
A sound mind.
Yes. That phrase, a sound mind, is the ultimate safeguard.
A sound mind. That means cognitive clarity. It means you aren't swept up in this emotional frenzy. You see the board clearly.
Right.
So when the adversary throws the "why are you angry" label at you to inject confusion, a sound mind recognizes it as a tactical maneuver rather than internalizing it as some sort of personal failure.
Which perfectly transitions the narrative from this internal psychological defense to external practical navigation.
Because it's one thing to understand it in theory.
Exactly. Knowing the mechanics of emotional manipulation is essential. But how does the author suggest applying this knowledge in a tangible, complex social environment?
Well, the sources provide a highly specific case study for this. It's the home group anecdote.
Yes, the home group.
This is really where the rubber meets the road for the author. He feels this red-hot conviction, he understands his mandate as a disciple, and he decides to put it into practice.
Okay, so what does he do?
He starts attending a neighborhood Saturday church group. He walks in viewing himself almost as a modern apostle, right? He's intending to share the unfiltered truth with real people in a corporate setting.
But the reality of the environment is vastly different from his expectations. He describes walking into what he actually terms a hornet's nest.
A hornet's nest?
Yeah. The group is not engaged in a rigorous pursuit of scriptural truth. Instead, they have adopted this highly syncretic approach.
Syncretic meaning they're mixing things.
Exactly. They are blending everything from ancient mythologies to extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch, and they're treating all of it with the exact same weight and reverence as the canonical scriptures.
It's basically the ultimate democratization of theology. Every single idea is equally valid,
Right.
which naturally creates an environment where absolute truth is inherently offensive.
Yes, because it elevates one thing above the rest.
Predictably, the moment the author tries to establish a baseline of truth, the moment he tries to cut through the mythology, the group's defense mechanism triggers.
And what do?
They hit him with the exact tactic we just analyzed. They look at him and ask, "Why are you so angry?"
Wow. The environment is basically designed to absorb and neutralize conviction. The group dynamic inherently protects the lukewarm state by enforcing emotional conformity.
Hmm.
So, what is the author's response to this hornet's nest? What does he do?
He leaves.
He just leaves.
He physically removes himself from the environment. And what's super interesting is his initial internal conflict over this decision.
I bet.
Because there is often this romanticized notion in religious culture that a true believer should stand their ground. Floop over the tables and shout down the opposition until everyone sees the light.
Yeah, the martyr complex.
Right. Retreating feels totally counterintuitive to the idea of being a bold disciple.
But the theological analysis he applies to this retreat is fascinating. He reevaluates the exit not as a defeat, but as strategic alignment.
Strategic alignment.
Yes. He recognizes that attempting to argue truth in a room dedicated to mythology is just an exercise in futility.
It makes me think of trying to perform a delicate surgery in the middle of a highly contaminated room.
Oh, that's a good picture.
Right. If the operating theater is covered in mud and bacteria, opening the patient up isn't going to save them. It's just going to introduce massive infection.
Absolutely.
The surgeon isn't a coward for refusing to operate in a sewer. They're recognizing that the environment fundamentally prevents the objective from being achieved.
That is a highly accurate parallel for the author's argument. And he bases this concept of strategic retreat on a very specific set of New Testament protocols.
Protocols specifically designed for managing false teachings, right?
Yes. The text cites 2 Timothy 2.23, but foolish and unlearned questions avoid, knowing that they do gender strifes.
Just avoid them.
Right. It also pulls from Titus 3.9, which explicitly commands believers to avoid foolish questions and genealogies, for they are unprofitable and vain.
Unprofitable. That's a highly analytical metric. It really removes the emotion from the decision.
It really does.
It's not about whether you are brave enough to fight. It's about whether the fight produces any actual return on investment for the truth.
The author also points to 1 Timothy 1.4. This warns against giving heed to fables and endless genealogies. The biblical mandate, as interpreted by the author, is not to remain in a toxic, unprofitable echo chamber and just yell into the void.
That's just a waste of time.
Exactly. The mandate is absolute situational awareness. Recognize when an environment is structurally incapable of receiving truth and leave.
But the sources also delve really deeply into the psychological toll this takes. They explore this concept of spiritual isolation.
It's a heavy toll.
It is, because when a person adopts this red-hot, uncompromising stance and systematically removes themselves from unprofitable, lukewarm environments, the natural result is profound loneliness.
Yes.
You wake up and realize you can no longer participate in the social rituals of the majority.
To counteract this isolation, the author draws immense validation from the behavioral patterns of Jesus himself.
How did Jesus handle it?
Well, the text notes that Jesus routinely withdrew from crowds. When he encountered the hardened, combative hearts of the religious elite, the Pharisees, he did not typically engage in endless circular debates just to win them over.
Right, he didn't sit there arguing semantics all day.
No,
Oh.
he spoke his truth, and when it was rejected or manipulated, he departed.
The text highlights Matthew 15.14, where Jesus literally says regarding the Pharisees, "Let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind."
Let them alone.
Let them alone. It is a direct command to cease engagement. And Matthew 10.14 introduces the famous principle, "Whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, shake off the dust of your feet."
And the act of shaking off the dust is highly symbolic.
What does it signify?
It is a deliberate unburdening. It means you are not carrying the failure of that environment with you.
Oh, I see.
You presented the truth. The environment rejected it. Your responsibility to that specific room is concluded.
That's incredibly freeing. But to be clear, the author doesn't just go home and lock the door forever. He doesn't abandon the concept of the rescue mission. He just refines the execution of it.
Right, he changes tactics.
He realizes that the corporate dynamic of the home group was carnal. It was built on social conformity and the shared mythology. So he shifts to a targeted, one-on-one approach.
Yes.
He maintains contact with specific individuals from that group, but outside of the weekly meeting.
Because by removing the audience, he removes the social pressure that triggers all those defense mechanisms. In a one-on-one setting, a person is much less likely to employ the Why are you angry? Deflection, because, well, they aren't performing for the group anymore.
The dynamic completely shifts.
The signal-to-noise ratio improves dramatically. The author actually found that individuals who were hostile in the hornet's nest were often open and genuinely searching when isolated from the hive.
It's like trying to teach a swimming class in the middle of a hurricane.
Impossible.
Sometimes you just have to pull individuals onto the life raft one by one, rather than trying to calm the whole storm.
That's exactly it.
Which brings us to the ultimate question driving this entire framework. Why go through all of this?
The big why.
Yeah. Why endure the isolation, the emotional gaslighting, and the constant social friction? Why not just let people navigate their own spiritual journeys at their own pace? What is the engine powering this relentless drive to pull individuals onto the life raft right now?
The answer the text provides is the overarching theme of the final section we need to cover. It's the timeline.
The timeline.
Yes. The author operates under the intense conviction that time is an incredibly scarce, rapidly depleting resource. And this brings us right back to his self-identified role as a watcher of the signs.
A watcher of the signs. That phrase just carries an inherent weight of duty.
It does.
Like in ancient times, the watcher was the person on the city wall staring into the darkness, right? They were responsible for sounding the alarm if an invading army approached.
Because if the watcher falls asleep, the city dies.
Exactly. The author feels that exact same burden, but regarding an imminent spiritual conflict.
The sources describe the current spiritual ecosystem as basically operating in absolute overdrive. The author posits that the adversary Satan is not just some distant, passive concept.
Right.
He views him as an active, hyper-aggressive entity currently operating on the earth with maximum intensity. He anchors this worldview in Revelation 12:12.
What did that say?
It says, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time."
He knoweth that he hath but a short time.
Yeah.
That phrase completely alters the physics of the author's reality. I mean, if the adversary knows the timeline is short and is consequently acting with great wrath, then a believer lounging in a state of lukewarm comfort is practically begging to be destroyed.
They're totally unprotected.
The environment is just way too hostile for passive survival.
And this creates the absolute necessity for the transition we've been discussing today. Uncompromised spiritual readiness is literally the only logical response to a state of great wrath.
Makes total sense.
The author points to the martial language used throughout the New Testament epistles to prove this point. Like Ephesians 6:13, it commands believers to take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day.
Armor. You don't put on armor to sit on the couch.
Exactly. And 1 Peter 5:8 paints a terrifying picture of the adversary. It says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour."
A roaring lion stalking prey. You do not fight a lion with a gym membership you never use.
No, you do not.
You fight it with sobriety, vigilance, and armor. These are the postures of a soldier on an active battlefield.
But you know what significantly heightens this urgency in the author's framework?
What's that?
It's the inherent uncertainty of the timeline. The text introduces a concept that operates alongside grand global eschatology. It is the concept of a personal, immediate end.
Oh, like your own death.
Yes. The global timeline might stretch on for years, but the individual timeline is fiercely unpredictable.
The text focuses intensely on the brevity and fragility of human life. It quotes James 4:14. "For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away."
A vapor.
A vapor. And Proverbs 27:1. "Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth."
The author challenges the reader to internalize the reality that their personal end of the world could literally happen in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It could be a sudden medical event, a car accident,
Yeah.
a violent incident. None of us possesses the guarantee of tomorrow.
Not a single one of us.
So if the mandate is to be found a faithful, active disciple upon the Master's return, and that return, whether personally or globally, could happen before the sun goes down, procrastination becomes a fatal error.
I really want to examine the psychological weight of this worldview for a second.
It's heavy.
Imagine living with this dual reality constantly running in your mind. On the surface, you are participating in modern life. You know, you are buying groceries, paying taxes, going to the dentist.
Right, normal stuff.
But underneath, you are running this parallel processing system that views every single interaction through the lens of eternal consequences. believing that the world is a burning building and time is expiring. How does a human mind sustain that without just collapsing into severe anxiety or complete detachment from reality?
It's a profound psychological tightrope. But according to the author's framework, the mind sustains this not through anxiety, but through that sound mind we discussed earlier.
Ah, the sound mind from Tekka Timothy.
Exactly. The intense focus on the eternal actually trivializes the temporal anxieties.
Hmm.
When you truly internalize that life is a vapor, the fear of human opinion just evaporates.
That makes total sense. If I actually believe the building is burning, I do not care if the person I am dragging out of the fire thinks I'm being impolite.
You don't have time to care.
The urgency completely overrides the social programming. The
Hmm.
emotional manipulation we discussed earlier, that fear being called angry or intense, it loses all its leverage because the stakes are simply too high to care about social comfort.
Exactly. The framework presented here suggests that the friction you experience when stepping into active discipleship is a feature, not a bug.
A feature, not a bug. I love that.
If you are operating in a hostile, compromised environment and you face zero resistance, it implies you have completely assimilated into the environment.
Wow. If you're not facing friction, you're going with the flow.
Exactly.
So let's synthesize the journey the author has taken us on. It's a remarkable analytical progression when you look at it all laid out.
It really is.
It begins by defining the target, dismantling those historical loopholes to establish that the grueling structural demands of discipleship apply universally, right here and now.
And then it moves into tactical awareness. It maps out the internal and external defense mechanisms.
Right.
How adversaries weaponize the concept of anger to induce shame and basically force a retreat into silence. It defines the strict difference between ego-driven frustration and purpose-driven passion.
And from there, it provides a very real protocol for engagement and disengagement. It gives the believer permission, and actually the mandate, to walk away from unprofitable hornets' nests, to prioritize signal over noise, and to engage in targeted one-on-one rescues rather than just shouting down a corrupted room.
And finally, it grounds all of this theory in the relentless pressure of a rapidly closing window. The presence of an active adversary and the fragile vapor of human life necessitate a state of absolute sobriety and vigilance.
But you know, the author's text doesn't end merely with a heavy diagnosis.
No, it doesn't.
He leaves the reader with a deeply practical, ancient mechanism for maintaining this state of readiness. He points to the Lord's Prayer, found in Matthew 6:9 to 13.
Yes. And the author recontextualizes this prayer. For many people, the Lord's Prayer is just a rote recitation, right? Like a poem mumbled at the end of a service.
Something you just memorize and say without thinking.
Exactly. But the author frames it as a highly potent daily cognitive anchor. It is a psychological and spiritual reset button.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. When you pray that, according to this framework, you are explicitly asking for the absolute reality of God to overwrite the chaotic, compromised reality of your immediate environment.
You are aligning your coordinates.
Aligning your coordinates. That's powerful.
And the crucial plea at the very end, deliver us from evil.
Yeah.
In the context of everything the author has laid out, this is not just some vague request. It is a specific daily plea for deliverance from the emotional gaslighting, from the unprofitable fables, from the spiritual isolation, and from the roaring lion seeking to devour.
It is the tactical request for the sound mind required just to survive the day. It is a remarkable analytical framework we've explored today. I mean, it challenges so many of the baseline assumptions of modern comfort. Whether one adopts the theology fully or simply analyzes the psychological mechanisms, the author details, the insights into human behavior and the avoidance of truth are just undeniable.
It really forces a confrontation with our own tendencies toward passivity and our susceptibility to groupthink and emotional deflection.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, listening right now, with a thought to examine in your own life based on the mechanics we've discussed. We spent a lot of time analyzing how people will quickly mislabel deep, urgent passion as anger in order to avoid facing an uncomfortable truth. They attack the messenger so they don't have to look in the mirror.
It's human nature.
So, take a look in your own mirror today. When you encounter someone who operates with intense, unyielding urgency about a truth they hold, even if it makes you socially uncomfortable, do you have the intellectual honesty to evaluate the substance of their message? Or do you find yourself immediately searching for an emotional label to dismiss them simply because you prefer the comfort of the lukewarm?
That's the real question.
Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.